I knew they were going to stick the landing for Ranking of Kings, but it's still just such a surprise to see how well they stuck said landing. I've said it over multiple reviews that Season 1 was going to conclude Part 1 of the story. Part 2 of the manga just recently started up, so there wouldn't be material for a very, very long time. But I also heard that Part 1 serves as a good stopping point, so if the anime never got more, it would still feel conclusive in its own way. And that's exactly what happened. Everything that I kind of wanted to see happen in this episode did. Daida relinquished the throne to Boji. Boji ended up being king for a time, and seemingly people were actually quite happy. But Boji's also an adventurer, and a part of me wondered, would Boji even want the throne? Would he want to go adventuring with Kage? And the idea of Kage separating himself, not feeling like he needs to be by Boji's side anymore, and he needs Boji more than Boji needs him. Of course, a misunderstanding. But the idea that, had Boji wanted to be king there, and continue to rule over his father's kingdom, he could have done that with Kage by his side. He could have changed the minds of the people, because he is king, and king's word is law. But ultimately, the fact that Boji decides, because of the encouragement of Queen Hilling, that he needs to live his life, he needs to do what makes him happy, and if being without Kage and doing his own thing is gonna make him miserable, then in return the kingdom would be miserable. And to relinquish the throne back to Daida, which Daida will be an amazing king with how he currently stands. He is completely a changed man, and I would really love to see even just an OVA of the difference of his leadership with a kingdom now. But the idea of wanting to build your own kingdom, start from scratch, just like your dad did, with your best friend by your side, there's no better way for Boji's character arc after the amazing things that he went through happened than what we just saw here. There's definitely some sequel bait and some cool things that would be explored in a Season 2/Part 2 of the story. Oken ends up getting released by King Bo because he's just an asshole, but I will admit, I thought he was going to cause a lot more trouble than just like breaking apart the rock and setting free the immortal bastard. But in return, he actually sent his head so far flying that a giant fish ate it, and his headless body, I mean, you could think maybe, would it digest? Would it then be turned into shit? Is it even possible? Who the hell knows? But it's interesting to see how they were originally going to transport the rock, and then in return, now they're probably going to transport a headless body, and as long as it stays separated, I mean, they should be okay, but, that'll eventually bite him in the ass. But it was just great to see all the characters and how this story, when you look at it, in terms of where it started, where it ended, and everything that came before it, it ultimately serves and functions as a classic fairy tale design. A hero, there's some trouble, whether it's evil stepmothers, a evil king, whatever it is, they end up defeating it, and then they get their happily ever after. The issue with a lot of fairy tales is while they're good for kids, once you get into more critical thinking, they're no longer as enjoyable if you really dissect the character arcs, because there's not a lot of time to see character growth and develop. Where Ranking of King excels is how it uses that classic storytelling approach, but rather than just having the start and end points and just like an action sequence or a romance sequence before then, instead it gives character arcs to show the ups and downs and that the forgiveness and redemption that this show is wearing on its sleeve, it feels warranted. I mean, of course, there's the Twitter outrage crowd and there's all the typical things you see in the anime medium, and that's never going to change because there's just a large portion of people who want to be angry and apply modern values in a medieval setting, but it is what it is. The thing though with it, from Miranjo to the idea of even, the king, Boji's mother, her own mother forgiving her, I mean, when you look at what she went through as a kid, it's not just like she started off as an evil person and then committed evil deeds. She started off as an innocent kid and made mistakes after all the evil shit that happened to her. And the fact that this show, rather than going a route of promoting vengeance as if, killing is the answer and, redemption of for like, oh, Boji is going to kill Miranjo because of what she did to his mother. Instead, Boji is the most kind-hearted soul. He's always been the character that has influenced this world and characters around him in being better people, and in return we see an entire kingdom in such a short while become a lot nicer to a deaf boy who they used to make fun of because Kage would steal his clothes and he'd be naked in the streets. And the fact that this show was confident enough to stick that landing of redemption and forgiveness while building up character arcs to get there, that's what makes this show work so well, and why it feels like such a well-earned victory for the kingdom as a whole. Yeah, there's the sequel bait. We have the new #1 king that was teased in last week's episode. We have Oken's headless body and things like that, and of course, the idea of watching Boji create a kingdom would be pretty fantastic. But I'm not gonna lie, if this was the ending, I wouldn't be crying, I wouldn't be upset. I could leave this completely satisfied, rewatch it for years to come, and still feel conclusive with what I experienced. And something that really caught me by surprise in this week's episode, because there wasn't an action sequence, right? The most we had was obviously Oaken's head being cut off, but that was a very quick scene. Instead, what they ended up doing with the directing to give it that extra oomph is the visual directing on the gorgeous backgrounds. They really spiced up the background art in this episode, I have to say. There was so many that it just looked like a gorgeous oil painting and things like that. But then to see the perspective, like when Boji was thrown in the air, hip hip hooray style, or just Kage kind of like trying to be a better person, and how even when being looked down upon, he still looked at things like, you know, the sunny side of a stormy day. It was so nice to see how, despite this episode not having moments that typically an anime studio would give extra time because it's not an action episode and there's nothing too exhilarating happening in terms of what a lot of anime directors would look at, but yet it still had its Sakuga moments. That this show as a whole, every episode has had those moments that separate it, that makes it excel as almost a mixture of old school Western cartoons and anime styles and these really creative visions, and it never looks bad. I mean, I still remember in the early days, like around the episode 6 mark, I was seeing so many people who generally are pretty knowledgeable, but I felt like they were fear-mongering about how there was no way this show could continue to look and perform this well when it got into its second core, that it was going to run into production issues. Look at it now, 23 episodes straight, and it never dipped, and at multiple points even excelled past the quality that it set out before. This show is a 10 out of 10 to me. I've said it, honestly, since the early days of the episodes, that I had a feeling this would become one of my favorite anime of all time. And now that it has concluded, with its 23rd episode, I can safely say this is now tied for my favorite anime with Attack on Titan. And if you know anything about Attack on Titan and my love for that story, it's my favorite story of all time in every medium. But when it comes to anime, I think I would tie it with Attack on Titan for me, just because it connected with me so much at an early stage, and it never dipped, and it continued to show character arcs. Like, seriously, when you push a boy off a volcanic layer here, there's usually not much coming back. But even as soon as he did that, I saw what they were attempting with his character, about the complexity of why he did what he did, and the idea of seeking that forgiveness and atonement, and the fact that this anime was confident in delivering that theme. It's absolutely priceless and fantastic, and to see the reunions and the characters in general just proud of the other, I'm incredibly satisfied. This is a show that I'm going to be immediately rewatching very, very soon, and I am hoping it gets a Blu-ray release in the West, because I need to own this, so I never forget it. But thoughts, if you have any, on Ranking of Kings, either the last episode, the anime as a whole. Would you like to see a season 2, or are you very satisfied with what we experienced here? Let me know down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new around here. Till next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.